The camera glides through a dark, echoing corridor. Metal doors slam shut one after another, the clanging echo almost unbearable. A single bare bulb flickers overhead, while distant footsteps of guards echo like a warning. Hidden behind these high concrete walls and coils of barbed wire lies a world few outsiders ever witness. Official photos show clean halls and orderly cells, but former inmates describe something entirely different. Rooms so crowded that men sleep standing, relentless interrogations that stretch through the night, and cries that never reach the outside world. Saudi Arabia is known for glittering skyscrapers and vast oil wealth, but behind the glamour is a justice system critics call merciless. With more than 80 prisons scattered across the kingdom and strict press restrictions, almost no independent observer has stepped inside. That secrecy allows abuse to flourish unseen. One former detainee, a young activist we'll call Ferris, was arrested for posting critical comments online. He says he spent months in an interrogation wing where the lights never dimmed. "You lose track of time," he whispered in a smuggled voice memo. "They want to break you before you even see a courtroom, if you ever do." His testimony matches countless others gathered by human rights groups: beatings with electric cables, hours of painful stress positions, and relentless sleep deprivation used as a weapon. This is more than the story of a single country's prisons. It is a human rights crisis with global implications. While world leaders sign billion-dollar deals, thousands of detainees endure conditions experts describe as torture by another name. In the chapters ahead, the hidden testimonies and disturbing evidence will pull back the curtain on a system built on fear and silence. A system the world can no longer ignore. Former prisoners and human rights investigators describe a pattern of brutality that begins the moment a detainee enters a Saudi cell. Newly arrested men and women are often blindfolded and shackled for hours or days, left unsure whether they will ever see a lawyer or their families again. Guards shout orders in rapid Arabic, and silence is treated as defiance. Those who hesitate to answer can be slapped, kicked, or forced to kneel for long stretches with their hands bound behind their backs. Several survivors recount being taken to underground interrogation rooms with no clocks or windows. One man, a university professor accused of cybercrimes for a critical tweet, told researchers that interrogators deprived him of sleep for nearly a week, keeping harsh fluorescent lights on around the clock. Each time he started to nod off, a guard would yank him upright or douse him with cold water. "It feels like time melts," he explained. "You start to question if the outside world even exists." Beatings are a recurring theme in testimony. Victims describe being whipped with electrical cables or wooden rods across the soles of their feet, a method designed to cause extreme pain without leaving easily visible scars. Others speak of being suspended by their wrists for hours, shoulders straining until they nearly dislocated. Human rights groups have documented cases of prisoners forced to stand for so long that their legs swelled and lost circulation, leaving lasting nerve damage. Women have reported gender-specific abuses, invasive strip searches, threats of sexual violence, and harassment intended to break their spirit. One former detainee, who had campaigned for women's right to drive, recalled a guard whispering that her family would be harmed if she refused to sign a pre-written confession. She signed, fearing for her relatives, but the torment continued. Solitary confinement is used as psychological punishment as much as physical. Prisoners are often placed in windowless cells barely large enough to stretch their arms, sometimes for months at a time. Food arrives through a slot in the door, and conversation is forbidden. "The silence becomes a roar," said a political activist who spent 120 days alone. "You talk to the walls just to hear a voice." Medical neglect deepens the suffering. Accounts tell of detainees denied basic treatment for broken bones, infections, or chronic illnesses like diabetes and heart disease. Guards often ignore requests for doctors, and families struggle to learn whether loved ones are even alive. Human rights monitors cite cases where prisoners died from treatable conditions simply because medication or hospital care was withheld as a form of pressure or punishment. These stories are not isolated. Reports from organizations such as Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch reveal consistent patterns across multiple detention centers, suggesting an entrenched system rather than rogue behavior by a few guards. Former inmates, lawyers, and family members describe how complaints vanish into a bureaucratic void. Independent investigations are almost impossible, as outside observers require government permission that is rarely granted. Despite the risks, survivors continue to speak out, smuggling letters and voice recordings to the outside world. Their testimonies form a chilling mosaic, a prison system where fear and secrecy provide cover for acts the international community defines as torture. Each account, whether of sleepless nights under glaring lights or of a loved one lost to untreated illness, underscores the same truth. Behind Saudi Arabia's walls, cruelty is not an accident but a method of control. The physical pain of torture is only the beginning. The long-term psychological scars can be even more devastating. Former detainees describe chronic nightmares, sudden panic attacks, and an inability to trust anyone, even family, long after release. Psychologists who have reviewed their cases say these symptoms mirror post-traumatic stress disorder common in war survivors. Months or years of constant fear rewires the brain, leaving many unable to resume normal life. Medical neglect is another weapon of control. Several ex-prisoners recount being denied essential medication for diabetes, heart conditions, or severe infections until they confessed to crimes they insist they never committed. One elderly scholar suffering from high blood pressure reportedly begged guards for a doctor as his vision blurred and chest tightened. Instead, he was left alone in his cell for hours. By the time he received care, he had suffered a minor stroke that permanently affected his speech. Women detainees face unique dangers. Some who campaigned for reforms say guards threatened to publicly shame their families if they continued hunger strikes or complaints. One activist recalled hearing the cries of a fellow inmate enduring what she believed to be sexual assault during a night interrogation. She said the fear of the same fate kept her silent for weeks. Solitary confinement, used widely, compounds these traumas. Prisoners describe being kept in tiny windowless rooms for months with no natural light and no human contact beyond the brief delivery of food. Experts call this psychological torture, capable of causing hallucinations, memory loss, and a distorted sense of time. A former political prisoner said he began talking to ants that crept under the door simply to hear a response. International human rights organizations continue to gather evidence despite strict Saudi censorship. Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch have documented dozens of consistent reports of beatings, forced confessions, and denial of medical care. United Nations special rapporteurs have repeatedly requested access to investigate, but are routinely denied entry or provided only carefully staged tours of select facilities. When confronted with these allegations, Saudi authorities typically issue brief denials or statements promising reform. Officials claim that prisoners receive fair treatment and that any misconduct is the work of a few rogue officers. Yet leaked internal memos and court documents tell another story, of a system designed to intimidate dissidents and silence political voices while maintaining an image of order for the outside world. Diplomatic relationships complicate accountability. Saudi Arabia's vast oil reserves and its role in global security mean that many governments tread lightly. While international leaders sign lucrative trade deals and attend high-profile summits in Riyadh, the plight of prisoners rarely makes headlines. Critics argue that economic interests overshadow human rights concerns, allowing the cycle of abuse to continue unchecked. Despite these obstacles, families and activists persist. Social media campaigns amplify the voices of those still inside, while exiles lobby foreign governments for action. Every leaked letter, every smuggled recording chips away at the wall of secrecy. Their determination serves as a reminder that even in the darkest conditions, the demand for justice cannot be fully silenced. This growing chorus of survivors, families, and international advocates paints a clear picture. The cruelty inside Saudi prisons is neither rare nor accidental. It is a calculated system of punishment and control, hidden behind high walls and diplomatic courtesy, waiting for the world to finally hold it accountable. Global pressure has slowly mounted as these accounts gain attention, but meaningful change remains elusive. International human rights organizations release detailed reports every year, naming prisons, dates, and methods of abuse, yet Saudi officials typically dismiss the findings as politically motivated. United Nations special rapporteurs have requested unfettered access to detention centers, but visits are either blocked entirely or restricted to carefully staged tours. Diplomats are shown freshly painted cell blocks, while the harshest facilities remain out of sight. Some governments issue formal statements of concern, but powerful economic and strategic ties often blunt their response. Saudi Arabia is a major oil supplier and a key partner in regional security. Many countries hesitate to risk those relationships. Trade deals worth billions overshadow the voices of detainees and their families. Critics argue that this selective silence effectively shields Saudi authorities from real accountability. Inside the kingdom, the risk of speaking out is enormous. Lawyers who attempt to represent political prisoners can lose their licenses or face imprisonment themselves. Families who go public with their loved ones' stories may find their own travel restricted or bank accounts frozen. Despite these threats, a small network of activists continues to gather testimonies and smuggle evidence to the outside world, often at great personal cost. There have been moments of cautious hope. In response to international scrutiny, Saudi leaders have occasionally announced reforms, promising improved conditions and better oversight. Yet former inmates and human rights monitors say these pledges rarely translate into reality. New prisons may look modern on the outside, but reports of beatings, forced confessions, and medical neglect persist. Some detainees describe being moved to newer facilities only to face the same mistreatment behind a different set of bars. The stories of those who survive provide a stark counterpoint to official narratives. A journalist released after years of detention describes how guards forced him to sign a statement declaring he had been treated with dignity and respect before he could leave. Another former prisoner recalls being warned that if he spoke publicly, relatives still inside would suffer. These accounts highlight the enormous pressure to maintain silence even after release, helping the system remain hidden. Still, cracks in that silence continue to widen. Digital technology and encrypted messaging allow prisoners and their families to leak information more quickly and securely than ever before. International media outlets, once hesitant, now publish detailed investigations drawing on satellite imagery, court documents, and covert interviews. Each revelation makes it harder for the world to look away. Yet without sustained global action, independent inspections, targeted sanctions against known perpetrators, and stronger legal protections for dissidents, conditions inside Saudi prisons are unlikely to change. Experts stress that genuine reform will require not just external pressure, but also a cultural shift within the kingdom's justice system, a recognition that dignity and human rights must apply to every detainee, regardless of political or religious views. The voices of survivors echo a simple plea: do not forget us. Their testimonies, smuggled out through hidden channels, are a call to conscience. They remind the world that behind the polished image of a modernizing nation, countless prisoners remain in cells where cruelty is routine and justice is a distant dream. Until those walls are open to true scrutiny and the abuses end, the phrase "unbelievable cruelty" will remain tragically accurate. Despite the mounting evidence and international criticism, genuine reform remains painfully slow, and for many prisoners, hope is a distant memory. Independent human rights monitors warn that without outside inspections and legal safeguards, the cycle of abuse will continue unchecked. They argue that real change requires not only external pressure, but also an internal cultural shift, one that places human dignity above fear and control. Families of detainees have become unexpected activists. Wives, siblings, and parents speak out on social media, post updates on missing relatives, and pressure foreign governments to act. Some organize quiet vigils outside embassies. Others write open letters to global leaders, begging for intervention. Every public statement carries risk. Several relatives who demanded answers have been harassed, threatened, or briefly detained themselves. Yet they persist, believing that silence is more dangerous than exposure. International advocacy groups continue to push for targeted measures. Proposals include sanctioning officials known to oversee prisons where torture is documented, restricting travel for commanders implicated in abuses, and conditioning trade agreements on demonstrable improvements in prisoner treatment. A handful of countries have begun to apply limited sanctions or raise the issue in bilateral talks, but these steps remain largely symbolic compared to the kingdom's vast economic influence. Inside Saudi Arabia, some modest initiatives are emerging. A few legal scholars and clerics quietly argue for a justice system rooted in transparency and compassion. They call for regular audits of detention centers, independent medical evaluations, and the right for every detainee to contact family and legal counsel. Yet such voices are fragile, facing censorship or retaliation if they speak too loudly. Meanwhile, the testimony of survivors continues to break through the barriers of secrecy. Smuggled letters, encrypted voice recordings, and clandestine interviews keep the world informed. Each story reinforces a collective truth. Cruelty is not a series of isolated incidents, but a methodical system designed to silence dissent and maintain control. For viewers and readers around the world, these revelations pose a challenge. It is easy to be outraged, harder to remain engaged when headlines fade. Human rights advocates urge people to amplify credible reports, support organizations documenting abuses, and hold elected leaders accountable for how they engage with Saudi Arabia. Even small actions, sharing verified information, supporting independent journalism, help chip away at the wall of silence. Ultimately, the struggle is about more than one nation's prisons. It is about the universal principle that no government should wield absolute power over a human being's body or mind. Whether a detainee is an outspoken activist, a journalist, or an ordinary citizen who crossed an invisible line, the right to humane treatment is non-negotiable. The future of Saudi prisons will depend on the convergence of many forces: persistent international scrutiny, courageous whistleblowers, principled diplomacy, and the unyielding voices of families who refuse to forget their loved ones. Until those forces succeed, the world must remember what countless prisoners have risked everything to reveal. Behind the towering walls and polished diplomatic image lies a system where suffering is deliberate and hidden, waiting for justice that has yet to arrive.